Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, whatever time you're watching this. I am going to show how to make a rack card with bleeds. That is the name of the game today, bleeds. So let me get into InDesign, and I'm going to create a new document. So that size of the rack card is 4 by 9. So we'll enter our width and our height. And yep, making sure the orientation is portrait. We're actually going to be making 2 pages, and we want to make sure that facing pages is unchecked. Now the important part for bleeds is down here in this section. So I am scrolling down to bleeds. If you're using a different version of InDesign, it's going to be in a similar area, but it's going to look a little different. So this guy is, I'm using the new 2019 version of InDesign, but it'll function the same way as in previous versions. So typical bleeds are about 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So I'm going to make sure that my lock is on, and I'm going to go ahead and put 1/4 inch all the way around. And because the lock is on, I only have to enter it once, and it updates on all sections. So this is almost like putting in a margin, but it's going to look different than a margin. And we'll see how that looks when I go ahead and hit create. And it's thinking, there we go. So the bleed line is actually this red line here going around the outside of our image. And the bleed is important because we want excess color to hang over if we're going to be printing a document that has images and color extending to the edges. So let me show you what that means. I'm going to go ahead and place a logo so that I can start to build a color family. So let me just scroll. I'm going to scroll to my logo because it's just the easiest thing for me to work with. And nope, I'm in the wrong folder, of course. Got a lot of folders. Nope, it's in the logo folder. Haha. And I want the Illustrator version, and I'm going to go ahead and click to place it. And when I do, there we go. When I do, it places it pretty large, so I definitely want to scale that baby down. And I'm holding down Control or Command, depending on what you're using. I'm on a Mac, so it's Command Shift. If you're on a PC, it's going to be Control Shift, so that it scales proportionately. So there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and create a box, a rectangle of color. And I'm just going to, this is kind of the cheater's way. I'm going to use my eyedrop tool, select this light green color. I say cheaters because it's going to use an RGB version of this color. I'm going to just say OK for now. And as we're working in CMYK print documents, that it's bad to do that because it creates a swatch that's RGB. So if I were to go and click a new swatch, see that's where we're getting bad. But I'll show you a different way in a moment here. But I just want to get the concept of bleeds down. So I made this rectangle, and when I created it, I extended it to that bleed line. And so the concept here behind that bleed extending over the document is so that when it gets printed, they use wonderful guillotine cutters at the print shop when they're printing a large quantity. And those guillotine cutters usually are pretty darn exact, but pretty darn exact isn't always perfect. So if I were to have my color only coming to the edge, and then I had white paper showing here where the bleed is, and that guillotine cutter comes down but cuts inside the edge, that white paper is going to show through here. And that's not great. That's not what we want. We want a full bleed, meaning that we want full color on that white piece of paper when it's going through the guillotine cutter. So now by increasing that edge of color, if the printer does cut anywhere inside or outside this section, it's going to cut having color on that edge so that no white paper shows through. I wanted to quickly circle back to the RGB versus CMYK. I am sadly at a disadvantage. Adobe Illustrator right now is updating, so I can't pop into Illustrator as quickly as I would like, but I'm going to go here to just circle back with regards to RGB. RGB is really only used for on-screen viewing. So web design, or if you're doing video design, RGB is used. So we really don't want that to be in a print document. We want CMYK. So anything that's printed should be in CMYK color space. I'm going to open a recent document here and update, sure. And I want to go to my swatches palette so that we can see that this green color has already been made into a swatch. So this would be in a similar family. I'm going to hit W here. I created this document without creating that bleed section like I did before in our rec card, but I have left room for the bleed. So you don't always have to set the bleed line up, but you should always be adding a bleed. So if you know that you already have a color swatch created from another document that you're going to use, you can paste that guy in and it adds itself right to the swatches palette. So then I can delete that bad green. It's not bad per se, it's just bad for print design. I'll note here that yes, I did make a back for this document, as you will, but for our demo I'm not going to be adding a back. So that is a little bit about our CMY and RGB colors. So the same thing happens when you're placing images. If you want the image to bleed or be across the entire document, you're going to have to extend that to the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and file and place an image. And I'm going to go find a recent image. There we go. Let's use that moose. So I'm going to aim for the edge of the bleed, that red, and resize. So now that object is bleeding to the edge. So on my keyboard I can hit the W key and it turns off all of my guides so that I can see just what's going to be printed. And from here, if I wanted to extend and really put the moose in the middle of the page, I can do that by increasing the size of that object and still wanting to make sure that I have that edge bleed, but then I can minimize that frame and voila. Now of course, if I was really making this work, I certainly wouldn't want my logo to be covered. And then I could add text as needed here in this document. So I had mentioned that I do want for this project, the rack card project, to be exported with bleeds. And this is how we do that. We're going to go to File, Export, or Command E, and I'm going to go ahead and find a place to put this. I'm just going to put this on my desktop and save. And when we get to the Adobe Export box, we want to go over to the Marks and Bleeds section. And again, this will look pretty similar no matter what version you have. Oops. And Marks and Bleeds, and this is what we want. We do want to make sure that we have at least crop marks and our bleed checked. So this might not be automatic, so make sure that you have that checked, or at least to make sure that you have the same numbers here in this section that you put in when you made your document. So I automatically chose crop marks. There are options for bleed marks as well. We don't really need those per se. If you are working with a printer, they might want this, so you'll make sure that you connect with them to see what specifics you'll need. But usually crop marks and making sure that you have your bleed turned on are all you need. So I'm going to go ahead and say export. And it's going to do its thing, and I'm going to go to my desktop to find it. There we go. I'm going to open that document. And so these are my crop marks here at the top. And I'm going to minimize, or not minimize, zoom out so that we can see this entire document. So when that printer does use the guillotine cutter, these are the crop marks that it's cutting on so that it'll be the proper size. I'm going to hover my cursor over here in the bottom left corner so I can see the document size. This is larger than our 4x9, so by adding a 1/4 inch around the sides, and then also you can see there is white on the edge here. This is just because that crop mark is a little larger than that 0.25 size. So that's why we're not getting the exact dimensions of 4.5 by 9.5. Those add a little bit of extra space, but we know that our document is 4 by 9, so those bleed marks are added inside.